Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Tom Amello, Nick Kling here on the backstretch of Saratoga Racecourse, and we're absolutely delighted to be joined by trainer Phil Gleaves. I met trainer Gleaves, Mr. Phil, many years ago. We had a great conversation then. As a matter of fact, I think Nick and I were doing a show for Cablevision up here in Saratoga, and Phil gave us some time, and we really appreciate that. And then, Phil, you've been away, or you've been an in and out returner to Saratoga. So I'd like you to first talk about where have you been and what's been going on and your feelings about Saratoga. And I know you're here today because you got a horse you think can run.
Well, first of all, my feelings about Saratoga, it's just the greatest place on earth. It's just the haven, the mecca of horse racing. I love it here. Horses love it here. And with regard to where I've been, I was a single father. I am a single father, and I had my son up here when he was 3.5 years old, and I had him in pre-K here in St. Clement's School, and I had to make a decision where to go for the stability of him on a year-round basis, and I decided to go to Miami. So for the last 7 years, I've been in Miami. Now, since then, his mother's come back into his life. He's older, he's 10 years old now, and I think now's a good time, and since I've gotten into town this week, it's a good time for me to come back to Saratoga. I'd like to certainly get back on the 6-month Saratoga circuit, 6 months here, 6 months Miami.
Oh, that's terrific. And we appreciate that you're sharing that, and I want to congratulate you, or not congratulate, but commend you, because there are a lot of tough decisions about being a single parent. It's just not easy, is it?
It's very difficult, as every single parent will tell you, but it's just something that you do out of love.
Okay.
Phil, let me just throw in a question, if I may, since we're
Nick.
talking about
Nick.
where you've been in Miami and that sort of thing. The first paying job I had in horse racing was to handicap the South Florida racing circuit, and I got very familiar with some of the horsemen down there, and I just, I wanted to see what you think. Anybody that thinks that South Florida racing is the minor leagues isn't familiar with the horse. There's some tremendous horsemen that follow that Calder, Gulfstream, and formerly Hialeah circuit.
There are horsemen that are every bit as good as horsemen here or California or anywhere else. We're just running for a lot less money. However, there are, Frank Gomez, God rest his soul, before he passed away, excellent horsemen, Eddie Pleaser, David Fawkes, people like that. There are a lot of good horsemen down there. So even though we're down there, we're running for less money, we still have to fight for every race.
Phil, talk about owners and having horses, and in our modern context, the information age, what with daily racing form formulator and the information that handicappers and owners have today, how knowing how well you do in a particular statistic in terms of turf or dirt, or something, how is that affecting the game today from your perspective as a trainer?
I don't look at stats, Tom, that specifically. I think that most horsemen are equally adept on turf and dirt, or long and short, and colts and fillies. I think it's just a question of what horses they have in their barn. So if a trainer goes through a streak of having a lot of turf horses in his barn and wins a lot of turf races, all of a sudden his stats for turf go up. That does not mean he can't train in the dirt. And I think some trainers get some reputations, false reputations, for being specific to one thing, like turf, or a trainer of fillies, or a trainer of sprinters. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think it's more a product of the horses that are in their barn.
Well, I'll give you a classic example of that from yesterday's race, and we talked about it the other day. Trainer Nick Zito hasn't won with a turf horse in almost. Has had one turf route winner over the last 5 meetings up here. Now he had Stevel in yesterday, who shipped in off a very good turf race, certainly fit the race.
Yeah.
And so you were faced with, okay, he just doesn't win at Saratoga, or he doesn't win a lot of turf. And he doesn't have a lot of turf horses. And the horse fit beautifully and just was an easy winner.
Of course, yeah. He looked like the right horse in the last race. And all that meant, over those last 5 seasons, is that Nick, maybe just didn't have a lot of turf horses. Or maybe had some turf horses that for one reason or another, he had to run over their head. There could be numerous reasons why people don't win races. And that's why it's a little bit dangerous to really get yourself involved too much in stats.
Yeah, we talk from this podium really about statistics being, let's say, predictors rather than determiners. And
yes.
so it's something that you think about. But what you're saying, and over the years I've talked to lots of trainers, you are really a slave, if you will, to the quality and the health of the runners you have in the barn.
Exactly right. The guy that has 20 mediocre horses in his barn and goes on an 0 for 57, and then people say, well, he can't win, he doesn't win, this, that, and the other. As soon as he gets a good horse in the barn, guess what? He wins. It's more about the horse than the trainer.
Phil, you know, people talk all the time about how horses love it here at Saratoga and the bucolic Adirondack air and atmosphere and that sort of thing, but you know, right now we're in the midst of kind of a rainy, humid spell, and that's something that you're probably very familiar with, a lot of hot, humid weather down in South Florida. How do you deal with that with your horses, since, you know, it's reputed that horses are more cold weather animals than you know, than liking the hot weather? What are there strategies that you can employ to, you know, keep your horses happy in that kind of weather? In
the weather, you're talking about, referring to the weather in South Florida.
Right.
It's very difficult. We have 2 fans on each horse. We have an overhead fan and a fan in front of the stall. On top of that, the racetrack itself has huge fans in the stalls. We train very early. We get them out at 5:30. We are completely finished training by 8:30.
Mm-hmm.
So we just do little things like that. I would say, Nick, that the biggest problem is keeping them hydrated. They seem to get dehydrated a lot. So we have to keep fluids and electrolytes in them, keep them balanced electrolyte-wise, and that's probably the biggest challenge.
What do you do? It must be an issue if you have horses that are, let's say, turf horses that might not adapt to the dirt well. Do you have problems with training because of the periodic heavy rains and that sort of thing that might prevent you from either training on a dry dirt track or on grass? How do you deal with that?
Well, it's a huge problem, not so much for training, because you know, I have no problem, and I'm sure most trainers have no problem training on sloppy tracks. The problem is having a turf horse. Mm-hmm. If you have a horse that is only adept at running on turf and not dirt, you're you're in trouble in South Florida during the summer, because it rains every day. Right. And most races are taken off the grass. And that gets extremely frustrating for myself, for the owners. It's frustrating.
Phil, before we talk about your barn and the number of horses you have in training, you're talking about surfaces. Let's talk about synthetic surface. Mm-hmm. And how you feel about that, and where you think the game is going surface-wise, if you will, and where you'd like it to go.
In a nutshell, I've never trained on them. I think there was a rush to judgment to put them in. I think we moved way too quickly putting them in. I don't see where it's helping us that much. We're just instead of, you know, they were implemented as a soundness help. And all we've done is take one set of soundness problems and replace them with another set of soundness problems. So in that respect, I don't really care for them. I think in 10 years they'll be gone.
Okay, let's talk about your barn. How many horses do you have in training?
I carry 20 horses.
Mm-hmm. Are you looking for more?
No. No.
Really?
Yeah.
Tell me why.
I just don't, I've had a lot more before. It takes away from the enjoyment of the game for me. I don't want this to be a job. I want it to be my passion. And I jump out of bed in the morning because I've got X amount of horses to train, and I can get it all done. And that's just me. Some guys have a lot of horses and they handle it very well. And I admire them for doing so. But my character does not allow that. I like to really be a hands-on trainer. I like to socialize in the morning. And I don't want a factory.
Okay, so let's talk about today's race, the 4-star Dave.
Mambo Meister.
You've got Mambo